The story of Pope Joan is one of the medieval world's most fascinating mysteries. It tells of a woman who allegedly disguised herself as a man, climbed the ranks of the church, and briefly reigned as pope, until a dramatic gender reveal ended her life. The tale of the first and only female pope first surfaced in the chronicles of the 13th century and spread widely across Europe, and even gained official church recognition for a time. History says every pope was a man. Now let's explore if the truth says otherwise. The earliest known account appears in a Latin chronicle by Jean de Mailly, a Dominican friar writing around 1250. His Chronicle of Metz contains the first mention of an unnamed woman pope, though he sets her story in the year 1099 and doesn't give her a name. According to his brief report, a talented woman concealed her gender and became a curial secretary, then a cardinal, and finally, pope. The deception was revealed when she went into labor and gave birth during a public procession. In this telling, the consequences were dire. She was tied to a horse's tail and dragged through the streets of Rome, before being stoned and then buried. Jean de Mailly even added that a fast was instituted in memory of this event and her punishment. This initial version is brutal and cautionary, reading like a morality tale of the results of deception unveiled, rather than an actual historical account. Later in the 13th century, another Dominican chronicler, Martin of Troppau, included an expanded version of the female pope story in a popular compendium of papal and imperial histories. Martin's Chronicon Pontificum et Imperatorum became one of the most widely read chronicles of the later Middle Ages, and its account of the female pope was especially influential. In Martin's version, new details appeared that set the template for the legend. The woman pope was given an identity, John Anglicus of Mainz, implying an Englishwoman born in Mainz, Germany. Martin placed her in the 9th century after the pontificate of Pope Leo IV, who died in 855. He wrote that after Leo, an Englishwoman who hailed from Germany, who went by John Anglicus, occupied the papal throne for over 2 years. Martin's narrative fleshes out her backstory. She was an exceedingly intelligent young woman who wanted to pursue further education. The only problem was, educational opportunities for her were extremely limited, so her and her lover cooked up a plan. They would go to Athens to further her education, but they would present themselves as two men seeking further knowledge in this ancient center of learning. While in Athens, she quickly proved to be far superior to her peers intellectually, and was brought to Rome where she taught science and theology. Her intellectual capacity and moral character were so universally respected that she was eventually chosen as pope. However, things ended up going off the rails in a very big way. She became pregnant, and the inevitable happened during a papal procession between St. Peter's and the Lateran Basilica. Caught in a grand religious procession, the disguised pope went into labor and delivered a child in the street, in full view of the astonished populace. Martin's chronicle says she perished during childbirth, not as a result of an angry crowd, and notes that after that, future popes avoided passing that particular spot in processions. This female pope, according to this telling, was then rapidly buried where she perished, and the baby became a ward of the church. Interestingly, according to this account, her son later became the Bishop of Ostia, in Italy, and saw to her receiving a proper burial. It's with Martin's account that the name Joan or Joanna entered the legend. Martin's authority on historical matters was taken very seriously by contemporaries. He was a papal chaplain, and his chronicle was read widely as factual history. Further, the sensational nature of the anecdote meant that the tale of Pope Joan spread rapidly, as the idea of a pregnant pope is a story that's built to rapidly spread. Once inserted into popular chronicles and literature, the story of Pope Joan spread throughout Europe, capturing the medieval imagination. During the 14th and 15th centuries, the legend was often accepted as historical fact. Many people didn't doubt that a woman had once been pope. It was retold by preachers, included in encyclopedic works, and referenced by scholars of the time. For example, the Italian author Giovanni Boccaccio in 1363 wrote about the female pontiff, giving her a place among notable women of history, albeit as a cautionary tale of pride. A woodcut illustration from a 1474 printed edition of Boccaccio's work even depicts Pope Joan in the very moment of giving birth, baby in arms, wearing the papal tiara. This vivid image shows how concretely the story was imagined in late medieval culture. Some historians also speculate that the High Priestess card for 15th century tarot decks is a reference to Pope Joan, though this can't be confirmed with certainty. Medieval commentators casually invoked Pope Joan as a real person. Notably, the Czech reformer Jan Hus, during his trial for heresy at the Council of Constance in 1415, referred to the example of a female pope to challenge church authority. Despite this being a heresy trial, no one on the council pushed back and argued that she was mythical. The fact that even loyal churchmen during a heresy trial didn't publicly object to Huss's mention indicates that the historicity of Pope Joan was accepted. Serious doubts about the Pope Joan narrative only began to surface after hundreds of years of uncritical repetition. As Renaissance humanism encouraged a return to original sources and a more critical look at history, some scholars started to question the entire narrative. The big giveaway that diminished the plausibility of a female pope turned out to be the fact that her story wasn't recorded at all in contemporaneous records. One early skeptic was Vatican librarian Bartolomeo Platina, who compiled Lives of the Popes in 1479. He included Joan in his list of popes, but ultimately concluded the story wasn't credible given the chronological impossibilities, rather than the underlying story itself. In essence, the time period where she was said to have been pope had been clearly accounted for. It was really in the 16th century, however, that Pope Joan became the subject of fierce debate. The timing is no coincidence. This was the era of the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The legend was dragged into confessional conflicts. Protestant writers often seized upon Pope Joan as a handy example of Catholic corruption or error, delighting in the embarrassment the story caused for Rome. At the same time, Catholic scholars worked to refute the tale and defend the unbroken maleness of the papacy. According to the Counter-Reformation scholars, the chronology was airtight. Leo IV died in July 855, and Benedict III was elected in the same year and confirmed by September. According to this narrative, records like Benedict's charter of October 855 and correspondence from that year all exist, so there's no space where an unrecorded Pope Joan could fit. That said, many Protestant scholars suggested that records of Pope Joan had been destroyed, and the records cited were forgeries to maintain the integrity of the Church. After all, the Church didn't have an official problem with the historical reality of Pope Joan as late as the 15th century. Only when Protestantism became an existential crisis for the Church did Joan become a real issue. All that said, by the 18th century, most historians had come to agree that Pope Joan likely never existed, even putting aside the possibility of forgeries, and there's good reasons for this. Today, historians largely consider Pope Joan a legendary figure rather than a real one, and the story is studied as an example of how medieval legends can emerge and evolve. No contemporaneous medieval document whatsoever corroborates the existence of a female pope in the 800s or at any other time. Not a single chronicle, letter, or record from the supposed era of Joan mentions such an astonishing event, a fact which would be virtually impossible if it had truly occurred. Further, even the fiercest enemies of the papacy in earlier eras never mention a female pope, though it would have been the perfect ammunition to attack Rome. There are no records of Eastern Orthodox sources mentioning Pope Joan after the Great Schism, a fact that historians believe would have been mentioned. Likewise, there are no records to indicate proto-Protestant groups like the Cathars and the Waldensians made any mentions of a female pope. Further yet, despite having clashed with the Islamic world extensively during this period, there are no Muslim sources discussing a woman leading the Catholic Church. In essence, the silence of all sources until the 13th century is the ultimate red flag that Joan was not a real historical person. Even after rigorous historical analysis has debunked Pope Joan, her story has proven remarkably enduring, and there are a few reasons for this. Most importantly, the tale is simply too sensational and intriguing to forget. It's the story of a secret female pope who rises to the position through her sheer brilliance, followed by a shocking revelation and downfall. These are elements of high drama that appeal to human curiosity. In terms of storytelling, it hits the marks of a classic folktale or legend, which helped it spread by word of mouth and point of pen alike. The story served both symbolic and educational purposes for a wide variety of audiences, all of whom could interpret it in a way that suited them. In the Middle Ages, it could be read as a moral lesson about deception, or even as a comment on the state of the Church. Still, another interpretation that has kept the story alive in modern times is who Pope Joan was supposed to be. According to the most popular telling of the tale, she was much more brilliant than any of her male counterparts, and achieved the position of Pope entirely on her merits. In this way, her story could be reinterpreted as a tale of both empowerment and oppression in a much less enlightened time. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to check out my other channels for contemporary unsolved mysteries and true crime content. Also, be sure to take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video with the history fans in your life. The story of the ghost ship Bechimo begins not with mystery, but with a fairly ordinary merchant vessel. She was built in Sweden and launched in 1914 under the name Angerman Elfven. Measuring about 230 feet in length and powered by a triple expansion steam engine, this sturdy cargo steamer could travel at about 10 knots. Originally commissioned for a German shipping company, she traveled the trade routes of the Baltic Sea between Sweden and Germany. As part of post-war reparations, the ship was transferred to British hands. In 1921, the vessel was acquired by the Hudson's Bay Company, a firm deeply involved in the Arctic fur trade. Renamed SS Bechimo and based out of Ardrossen, Scotland, the ship embarked on annual voyages to the far north. Over the next decade, Bechimo completed 9 successful trading voyages along the remote northern coast of Canada, visiting Arctic trading posts and carrying valuable cargoes of pelts. In the fall of 1931, Bechimo set out on what would be her final voyage under command of a crew. It was late in the shipping season, and the steamer was laden with a rich cargo of furs collected from trappers. As Bechimo navigated the waters off Alaska's northern coast on October 1st, an early winter storm and falling temperatures conspired against her. She became trapped in the forming pack ice near Point Barrow, Alaska. The crew temporarily abandoned ship, trekking about a half-mile over the ice into the nearby town of Barrow to seek shelter from the brutal cold and wind. After 2 days, the men returned to find that their ship had miraculously broken free from the ice on its own. Relieved, They reboarded Beichimo, but their joy was short-lived. On October 8, 1931, the ship became hopelessly mired in pack ice once again, this time far more firmly, and no amount of waiting or effort would release her. Faced with the prospect of their ship being stuck in the ice all winter, the Hudson's Bay Company arranged an aerial rescue. On October 15th, an aircraft arrived to evacuate most of the crew. 22 men were flown out to safety, leaving behind a hardy elite group of 15, including the captain, who volunteered to remain near the ship. These men constructed a makeshift camp on the sea ice some distance from Beichimo, using timber and materials from the ship to build a wooden shelter. They prepared to winter in the Arctic, hoping to keep watch over the ship and perhaps free her when the ice thawed in spring. For several weeks, the men endured the polar night and relentless cold, all while guarding their trapped vessel. On November 24, 1931, a powerful blizzard swept across the Beaufort Sea and enveloped the area in howling winds and snow. The men hunkered down in their shelter as the storm raged. When the blizzard finally subsided, they emerged to an eerie sight. The Beichimo was gone. The spot in the ice where the 1,300-ton steamer had been embedded was now empty, with only broken ice and snowdrifts remaining. The ship's captain initially assumed that Beichimo must have broken up under the force of the storm and sunk to the bottom of the frozen sea. With that, the remaining crew prepared to trek to civilization. But within days, an Inuit hunter arrived at their camp with astonishing news. He had spotted the Beichimo drifting intact about 45 miles south of their location, still trapped in the ice. Acting on this tip, the captain and his men set out over the ice to find their wayward ship. They managed to track down the Beichimo, which had indeed been carried off by the storm to a new position off Alaska's coast. The crew boarded her one last time, and they found the vessel weather-beaten from its unplanned solo journey, and again locked in ice. Deciding the ship was unlikely to survive the rest of the winter intact, they hastily salvaged the most valuable furs from her hold to save the precious cargo. Having secured what they could, the crew finally abandoned the Beichimo for good in late 1931, and the Hudson's Bay Company soon declared the ship a total loss. Unbeknownst to her former crew, the SS Beichimo refused to sink beneath the ice. Freed from human command, the empty ship began an extraordinary drift through Arctic waters, a true ghost ship wandering the seas without a crew. In the weeks and months following the abandonment, local hunters and travelers started reporting uncanny sightings of a lone steamer on the horizon. Just a few weeks later, Inuit hunters sighted Beichimo still afloat near Skull Cliff, south of Barrow. Several months after that, as winter turned to spring, Beichimo appeared yet again in a new location. By March 1932, she had drifted roughly 300 miles to the east of the point where her crew lost her. A trapper making a long dog sled journey from Herschel Island to Nome encountered the ship locked in ice and actually boarded her before continuing on his journey. In the spring of 1933, another group of Alaskan Inuit hunters sighted the wandering freighter. They traveled out to the Beichimo across the ice and managed to climb aboard. As they explored the ship's cold, empty corridors, fate intervened yet again. A sudden freak storm blew in, trapping the hunters on the ship for 10 days. For over a week, these unintended passengers rode out the gale on the ghost ship, no doubt wondering if they would share the vessel's cursed fate. When the weather finally broke, the group safely escaped back to shore. Beichimo, however, wouldn't remain in one place for long. By summer, she was roaming freely once more. One of the most well-documented encounters occurred in August 1933 near Wainwright, Alaska. The ship was spotted about 12 miles offshore, and this time multiple parties converged on the elusive ship. Local villagers set out in small boats, and a trading schooner named the Trader also approached the derelict. Aboard the Trader was a Scottish writer and botanist named Isabel Wiley Hutchison, who was on an Arctic expedition of her own. Hutchison later described the eerie scene as she and the crew of Trader boarded the HMO's rusting hulk. The ship was firmly stuck in an ice pack, but still upright and intact. The would-be salvagers scavenged what they could. According to reports, the Inuit locals removed practical items such as barrels of preserved food from the drifting steamer. The Trader's crew likewise gathered valuables and attempted to free HMO by attaching lines to tow her. Despite their efforts, the 1,300-ton ship remained frozen in place and would not budge. After rescuers had taken their souvenirs and supplies, another bout of foul weather forced everyone to leave. When they returned the next day, HMO had once again vanished from sight, continuing her solitary voyage northward with the shifting ice. Throughout the mid-1930s, sporadic reports of this Arctic ghost ship continued to emerge. In July 1934, a group of explorers encountered and boarded the ship while she drifted along the coast. In September 1935, she was sighted off the northwest coast of Alaska, again evading any attempt at capture. One of the last major attempts to secure the ship came in November 1939, nearly 8 years after her abandonment. Captain Hugh Polson, a seasoned mariner, finally managed to catch up with the ghost ship and went aboard, intending to reclaim the vessel once and for all. He hoped that perhaps the ship could even be freed and sailed again. But as Polson and his small salvage party worked, relentless encroaching ice floes made the situation increasingly dangerous, and the Arctic was not ready to relinquish its prize. In the end, Captain Polson had to give up his salvage effort and retreat, leaving the ship to the ice yet again. This 1939 boarding by Polson is often cited as the last time anyone set foot on the ship. After that, HMO seemed to become more elusive as the years passed. Records indicate there were no official sightings during the 1940s or 1950s, though it is certainly possible some unreported glimpses occurred. Many believe that the ship may have finally been fully claimed by the sea. But then, in the 1960s, HMO made 2 final surprise appearances. In March 1962, a group of Inuit hunters along the Beaufort Sea coast spotted a familiar silhouette, an old ship drifting along the ice-choked sea. After 30 years, HMO was still afloat. The astonished witnesses watched the ghostly freighter, but the encounter was fleeting, and the ship could not be caught. The last recorded sighting of the ghost ship came in 1969, 38 years after her crew had left her to the elements. A group of Inuit hunters reported seeing the HMO stuck in an ice pack between Point Barrow and Icy Cape, almost the exact region of her original disappearance. The decades had come full circle with the ship once again imprisoned in Arctic ice. After 1969, the HMO was never seen again, and what finally became of the tough old steamer remains a mystery. Over the years, many have speculated about the HMO's ultimate fate. Some have suggested that the durable ghost ship could still be out there somewhere, perhaps drifting as an ice-scarred wreck or grounded on a remote shore. Maritime experts generally take a much more dim view of the ship's chances. They agree that the HMO probably foundered, perhaps in the 1970s after her final sighting, and now lies somewhere at the bottom of the Beaufort Sea. If the ship was at the bottom of this remote Arctic sea, it's likely that no signs of the ship will ever be found.